Nancy Drew, Creature of Kapu Cave, is sometimes called the worst game in the entire series. At least that was the case before Midnight in Salem and the Shattered Medallion came along. The critics generally point out that the plot is messed up, the character graphics are yikes, and it's noticeably shorter than the other games, despite having a fair amount of padding. So, a shorter game with no plot and weird looking characters. Definitely a recipe for disaster. Nancy is going to Hawaii for 3 weeks to work for an entomologist named Dr. Quigley Kim. Nancy's not getting paid and she has no idea what the job entails. That sounds like a bad idea to me, but hey, at least she gets a free trip to Hawaii. I like the opening scene. It shows the creature of Kapu Cave growling and attacking Quigley's camp. I especially like seeing the lantern get smashed against the tree, and the background music complements the scene well. It's so good, I'm willing to overlook the somewhat silly explanation that it was Dr. Craven throwing a temper tantrum. You'd think he would shout Quigley's name at least once, but no, he decides to grunt and growl like a dinosaur the whole time. Nancy arrives at Big Island Mike's Immersion Excursion Center. Mike is inside his office. I don't like his design. Big Island Mike definitely needs some improvements. His ponytail is not doing him any favors. His mouth feels like it was slapped onto his head instead of being part of his face. He has a tendency to lean his head back to the point where his pupils disappear. That terrifies me. The coloring on his neck is bad. You can see where they cut off working on his neck, and they made his entire chest the same color. There's no shading whatsoever. If you look closely, the edges of his hands and arms are blurry, like a movie with bad green screen. So, yeah, they could definitely improve his design. But I like him as a character. He's the most memorable character of the game to me, and his voice acting is really good. He's kind of pushy. He interrupts Nancy and tries to sell her one of his vacation packages. When he learns who Nancy is, he refuses to give her the car keys unless she makes him a necklace first. He claims it's way better than working for Dr. Kim. Sure, making an aloha necklace is better than sorting trash jars, but come on, dude, Nancy isn't here on vacation. She already has a job. Stop trying to get her to buy your washed-up, overpriced tourist package. Nancy goes to the beach when Ned calls. Nancy interrupts him because she sees the Hardy Boys. I feel bad for Ned in this game. He's talking about his problems, only to have his girlfriend hang up on him because other guys are around. Unlike other games, Nancy doesn't make a point of calling Ned back and apologizing. You can ignore him for the rest of the game. Just let Ned think Nancy doesn't care. The Hardys walk up. Frank says, "Nancy?" And Joe says, "What are you doing here?" If you look carefully, only Frank's mouth moves. Both lines come out of the same character's mouth. It's a bad sign that the game can't tell the Hardy Boys apart. The Hardys look bad. They looked way better in Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. I don't know why they didn't reuse the models from that game. It came out only a year before this game did. Just take those designs, slap different shirts on them, and you're done. It would have saved money and looked so much better. Joe looks hideous. He looks like a caveman with a comb over. His shirt is ugly, and his arms have a shiny plastic tint to them. Frank looks okay. I'm not a fan of his hair or his fake muscle shirt, but I can live with it. Clearly, the designers put more effort into Frank than Joe, because Joe never appears again outside of the scene. The Hardys were hired by Richard Akins to do a background check on the Mapus. Joe mimes out everything he says, which is kind of annoying, but also kind of fun. Joe brings up the legend of Kane Okala, who brings bad luck. Kane could probably explain why the local pineapples are dying, if he existed, which of course he does not. Happy Frank. Kudos to the voice actors here. They did a good job making this scene work. It's a somewhat poor exposition scene. It goes on for too long, and the game doesn't follow through on most of this stuff. Kane Okala, the title character, nobody investigates him. The pineapple crop? Nobody looks into that either. There's a newspaper about the bad pineapple crop in Mike's office, and that's about all we get on the subject until the end of the game. Imagine how much better the mystery would have been if these things, which are introduced as the main parts of the mystery, were actually parts of the mystery. There are 5 places on the beach where you can find shells. There are enough shells to make an aloha necklace. After this, the shells appear randomly. I mean random. I've gotten stuck on this challenge multiple times. I need to make a necklace because I don't have enough money for fishing bait, and it takes forever to get enough seashells. They don't appear often enough, and you're likely to get a type of shell that you don't need. To make things harder, most of the necklaces require special seashells that can only be purchased in Big Island Mike's store. That's useless! I don't have spare money to buy seashells. That's why I'm making necklaces for money in the first place. I understand why they made it difficult to make seashell necklaces. If it was too easy, players would make a ton of necklaces for lots of money. But they made the seashell hunting too random and difficult. It's not a fun challenge. You make the seashells at a specific table. It's a little unintuitive that you have to place the shells at the top of the string instead of placing them where you want them to go. Mike takes your necklace and refuses to pay you for it because it was his idea. Did I mention he's a huge jerk? He forces you to make a necklace, he sells it for money, and gives you nothing in return. I don't know how he stays in business without getting tons of angry reviews from his customers. Mike shows Nancy the car key, then he immediately takes it back. That's also a jerk move on his part. It makes me hate him. Mike's main purpose in this game is to force you to do all his chores. Granted, all the characters in the game do that, but Mike goes out of his way to make up chores for you. And that's just mean. Big Island Mike warns Nancy that Kaneokala's angry over what's happening at the Healy Healy. Then he finally gives you the car key so you can leave forever. Good riddance. The car has a Krollmeister GPS, which serves as the game's map screen. I like the animation that plays when the GPS turns on, but it's a little too long. It's 10 seconds to load the map screen. When you click on a spot, it's an extra 7 seconds to get there. So you spend at least 17 seconds on the GPS interface. It feels like they're purposely wasting time to make the game longer, especially when you consider how many unnecessary trips that Nancy is forced to take between Quigley and Camp Quigley. I know, other games in the series have travel animations on the map screen too, but they're not as long as this one. I prefer the map screen in Secret of Scarlet Hand, where you can click to skip travel animations. The bridge back to town collapses. It's a nice looking scene. I like it. This Nancy segment's probably my favorite part of the game. You get to explore 2 new areas, solve some puzzles, meet a new character. It's good. Too bad the rest of the game isn't like it. Nancy's car gets stuck in a ditch, and she explores the ruined camp. She finds a tape recorder. Quigley left behind a lot of notes, maybe too many notes. You have to go through 4 or 5 of them to get to the part that actually matters. Quigley complains about her voice and her father. She sets up camp, she thinks she's being watched, and she doesn't understand the whispering noises in the jungle. Nancy hears the whispering noise a few times. It's kind of creepy, and the end of the game explains, oh, it's beetles rubbing their legs together. Quigley should have recognized it. She's the bug expert after all. The important note on the tape recorder is about moth larvae in Quigley's trunk. You can hear her pressing the buttons on the trunk. Nancy needs to recreate the sequence of sounds to open the lock. This is a solid puzzle that I like. Inside the trunk is Quigley's notebook about Dr. Malachi Craven. It says he's an angry genius with a blog who loves solar power. There's a phone number which you can call, but the person quickly realizes you're not Quigley and hangs up. The phone number subplot was not well explained. You can easily miss it if you select the wrong conversation option with Dr. Craven, or if you miss the somewhat narrow window to talk to Quigley. It turns out Quigley was paid to spy on Craven. That's the number of her employer. Wow, that's pretty big information. I wish it wasn't hidden in an optional subplot that I missed the first 5 times I played the game. I also wish we figured out who hired Quigley to spy on Craven. A rival company, perhaps? Also in the trunk is a hook and a Healy security pass. You attach the hook to the winch, and you use the winch to get the car out of the ditch. Your next step is to fix the radio. You have to try to turn it on before you check the solar panel, or else Nancy won't realize the panel needs solar cells. I don't like the requirement of looking at the radio first. I think Nancy should be smart enough to know the solar panel needs fixing without checking the radio. Nancy goes to the Healy. Either use the pass on the gate or call the guard. The alarm goes off and Nancy is forcibly taken to Craven. He yells at you, accuses Quigley of stealing the pass, then yells at you some more. Eventually Nancy puts her foot down and says, "That's enough!" Gosh, I wish Nancy had stuck up for herself like this when Mike forced her to do chores. I like how Nancy slips in some compliments about Craven that's very smooth and he eats it all up. Craven quickly decides he likes Nancy and agrees to help her. Kind of. He asks you to get a dozen seeds from some plants. This is a simple enough challenge, just take the brown seeds with splotches on them. I wish the seashell hunting challenge went as quickly as this one does. The lab itself is a really cool looking location. There's lots of metal and green goo. It's very futuristic. Nancy sees there's a piece of paper sticking out of Craven's lab coat, but she doesn't want to risk taking it, which is sad, because if she did take it, that would skip half the game. Craven mentions he gets sleepy whenever he takes this antihistamine, which is nice foreshadowing. He refuses to give you a tour or tell you about his current boss. That's pretty much all you can talk to him about in this game. It seems weird that he keeps letting Nancy back into a secure facility to talk to him when he has nothing to say. At least give her a conversation about the destroyed bridge, or something about Kaneokala, the pineapples, the mapus, etc. I don't like the solar panel puzzle because it's not explained. It looks like a Sudoku puzzle, but it's not. It's an addition puzzle. You want to place numbers on the board so every row and column adds up to 30. If Nancy said this at the start of the puzzle, then I'd be fine with it. But since the rules aren't explained, the puzzle turns into random guessing. And all the people who thought it was Sudoku quickly get stuck because rows have repeating numbers. A green light turns on when a row is correct. When you get them all, you raise the solar panel into place with the winch. I like how Nancy uses the winch twice. It's a really cool tool. Nancy can now use the radio to call Dr. Quigley. The audio is unintelligible nonsense. Quigley mishears everything Nancy says, there's bad static, and Quigley hangs up forever. If you call her back, she doesn't respond. Either she doesn't notice the radio call, or she just doesn't care. Nancy complains she doesn't know where Green Trigger Rock is. She calls the Hardy Boys for help. Joe promises to find a map or something. Big Island Mike says he has no idea where Green Trigger Rock is, and he explains his try it and trade it system. I don't think we really need an explanation here. Nancy already tried it out and hated it. Thanks. Plus, the game forces you to do the necklace making and fishing anyway. That's basically all there is to the system. Players don't need it explained when they learn it through direct experience. I like how Joe points out the entire thing is a scam because Mike gets to make real money while paying them fake money. Call him out on his lies, Joe. The interface at the bottom of the screen is different when you play as the Hardy Boys. That is a nice touch. You can also change the color of Nancy's interface in settings. That's neat, even if it doesn't affect the gameplay. Mike agrees to leave his office if you catch 6 Alua fish for him. He gives you a magic can of bait which never runs out. Too bad you don't get to keep it for the rest of the game. The fishing challenge is boring and takes too long. I guess it wouldn't be so bad if you only had to do it once and the other times were optional, but no, you're basically forced to do it 3 times in order to beat the game. So it's a huge, boring time waster. To make things worse, the challenge is directly reused from Secret of the Old Clock. They didn't even bother to change the animation of the fishing rod being cast. You're forced to see the same animation over and over again. Another big time waster is that you're forced to pick what kind of bait to use every single time. Joe only has one type of bait, but you still have to pick it. They should have made it so the bait selection screen only shows up if the player has multiple types of bait. Seriously, who likes the fishing challenge enough to buy multiple types of bait? What player is saying, you know what works well with this super strong bait? Really weak bait that doesn't catch expensive fish. You have to wait 4 to 10 seconds before the fish takes the bait. This is way too slow. You can buy a fish attractor to make it so fish bite after 1 to 2 seconds. The fact that they made a way to speed up the challenge just proves this challenge is too slow. And like I said, you have to do it 3 times. It's terrible. What fish you catch is random. The first time around, the game doesn't let the challenge go on forever, thankfully. Even if you try to lose on purpose by saving and reloading, the game will eventually throw a lure fish at you, forcing you to win. An earthquake hits. Mike says it's because of Pele, the fire goddess. He says Pua is a great kid with no problems. Pua will say the same thing. In retrospect, it's kind of dumb for the Hardys to investigate Pua by only talking to her and her dad. Like, of course they're going to say Pua's a good person. Do the Hardys honestly think Mike would start bad-mouthing his own daughter to strangers? Pua's design is bad, her body proportions are off and look odd. If you look at her from a distance, her hair is a different color, and her face is round. When you zoom in to talk to her, her face becomes much taller. Pua pays you for the fish. It would be nice if the game told you what the prices for the fish were before you catch them. Like her dad, Pua insists Kaneokala is real. He hates the Hili Hili because... reasons. It's kind of silly the Mapus keep saying the Hili Hili is bad, but they never say why it's bad. You'd think they'd have an actual reason, not generic rumors. When you give Mike the fish, he leaves. Now you can snoop in his office. I don't like this investigation. The only clue Joe finds is a note on the calendar which says delivery from JK. He could easily have seen that note earlier. It's clearly visible from the spot where you stand to talk to Mike. You can't go through Mike's desk, and the only thing Joe finds in the closet is a map for Nancy. There are many other drawers here, but Joe ignores them. This doesn't feel like investigation. It feels like having evidence thrown at you. Joe calls Nancy with the coordinates and says, "Gosh, I'm good," in a self-centered way that I don't like. You found a map, Joe. No need to be so full of yourself. Then Joe gets clobbered and disappears for the rest of the game. We hear Joe's long phone message twice in a row. That's annoying. They should have played the last 5 seconds of the call, not the whole thing. Nancy enters the coordinates on her GPS and goes to Three Finger Rock. It is a long walk to reach Dr. Kim, and it feels like another time waster. Admittedly, the scenery is nice. The scenery in this game is really good. Too bad the characters are so awful looking. Despite the nice scenery, there's nothing to do here besides grab baggies from fast traps. Whenever I play the game, I click rapidly to get through this area as fast as I can, and it still takes about half a minute. There are 4 parts to the trail, or at least there are 3 spots where the screen fades to black. You don't have to play as Nancy here. You could always call the Hardy Boys again and do all of the Frank stuff right now. It's neat that you can switch between the 2 stories whenever you want, but I think it's done much better in Legend of the Crystal Skull. Here, the Nancy storyline is too unconnected to the Hardy storyline. The mystery of who destroyed the camp has nothing to do with the Mapus. The lack of a solid story hurts the game, and it's hard to get around that problem when it takes half the game to reach Dr. Quigley. Quigley is an okay-looking character. It's neat how she's on a winch for most of the game. That's different. Although it limits her animation, her one arm doesn't move at all, so she can't move that much, especially compared to the other characters. Quigley goes on long digressions, mostly about her father. That's kind of a funny premise. I'd like it if there was another game where Nancy has to keep her distractible coworker on task. Quigley gets mad at Nancy for not bringing a clipboard. You go all the way back to camp to get it, then Quigley gets mad at you because a page is missing. That's twice she's mad at Nancy for something that isn't Nancy's fault. Quigley is kind of a jerk when we first meet her. Nancy explains the camp was destroyed by an unknown person. Quigley says, "Oh," and has no further thoughts on the subject. It says a lot that Quigley does not care at all about the mystery. Quigley orders Nancy to recreate her findings. The Frass puzzle is terrible and takes so long, I always get the solution online. I never bother to solve it legitimately. A lot of the complaints about this game center around this puzzle, which takes up about a third to half of the game. It feels like padding designed to make the game longer, because it sure isn't fun, interesting gameplay. You have to get a colored baggie from each of the 6 Frass traps. 2 of them are at Kapu Cave. Notice how Kapu Cave is in the title of the game, but it's unimportant to the game? We learn about it via clipboard. None of the characters talk about it or go there. Granted, it's a good title for a game, but the title doesn't fit the game. Each Frass trap has a plant near it. You need to write the vegetation code on the clipboard. It's easy enough to get bananas and no plants. To get the others, you're supposed to use the machine at Big Island Mike's. It has educational information on things like folklore, Hawaiian mythology, and plants. But it costs money, so I never use it. There's also the Wiki Tiki game, which has cool music. The game itself is no fun, it's just rock, paper, scissors. You have to get lucky when guessing randomly in order to win weak prizes like a keychain. This also costs money, so I never use it. To do the Frass analysis, you need a microscope lens. Nancy goes to the Healy. The guard doesn't want to let Nancy in, but she talks over him and gets an invite from Dr. Craven. Craven says Nancy reminds him of the niece he never gets to see. I like that line. It gives Craven a little more depth. He agrees to give you a microscope lens if you fertilize plants for him. I don't like this puzzle. There's too much to keep track of. It often turns into random guessing until you get it right. Each plant has 4 levels of health. 2 of them count as correct and 2 don't. And you've got 7 colored knobs, which help some plants and hurt others. Too much to keep track of. I think the puzzle would be better if it had, say, 4 knobs, not 7. While leaving, Nancy hears Craven scream and fire an employee. He's so mad he smashes a bunch of glass. He might be a worse boss than Quigley. For the Frass puzzle, you need to count the number of Frass, number of seeds, and number of insect parts. There are pictures of what these things look like. Record how many seeds there are, then sort these 3 groups from most to least in order to get the detritus predominance. You also need to weigh the Frass on the scale by moving all of the non-Frass things off the scale. You're supposed to do that for all 6 bags of Frass. It's too much work. If all you had to do was count the number of Frass in each bag, that would be okay. Or if you only had to do those long calculations for 1 bag, that would be okay too. But no, you have to do all these long calculations 6 times, and if you get one wrong, you're basically forced to do all of them over again from the beginning. It's not a good puzzle, and thank goodness the solution is the same each time so you can copy it. If it was a random solution and you had to do the puzzle afresh each time you played the game, I don't think players would put up with that. If your answers are correct, the formula machine spits out 119456. Quigley is excited and says they're going to be famous! That's the number of Norsa Beta odorata moths. They're having 10 times as many babies as normal. Why? Quigley will explain if we do more Frass analysis. Oh, there's a part 2. Quigley says Frass is moth poop, which is gross. But first, Quigley wants Nancy to break into the Healy and steal whatever it is they're making. Yes, Quigley orders Nancy to break the law, just in case the Healy has something to do with these moths. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. This entire challenge is a waste of time. Obviously, the moths at Kapu Cave are not eating the plants which are locked inside a high-security greenhouse that's far away. I don't know why Quigley even entertains this notion. Wouldn't it have made far more sense to test out all the common moth foods first, not second? Ugh. At the Healy, Nancy pretends to leave and doubles around to see Dr. Craven has fallen asleep. The pocket of his lab coat has the paper from Quigley's clipboard. After he wakes up, you can confront him about it. He admits he trashed the camp, and Nancy can't talk to Quigley about this. Weird. You'd think Quigley would want to know. Craven asks how Nancy knows about the paper, and he believes the obvious lie that she has really good eyesight. This is an optional conversation. In case you missed it, the ending to the game includes a parenthetical remark which says Craven destroyed the camp. I'm not a fan of that. The opening scene is all about the camp. It feels like the camp is so important, it should be addressed directly in the game, not just as an afterthought in the ending. The same goes for several other things in the ending. Nancy checks Craven's tablet. There's a 12-second animation of him making noises but not waking up. I don't like the way he looks from this angle. His neck looks so weird. Other than that, he's probably the best looking character in the game. The goatee could be improved, but his design gets the job done. The way he moves looks natural, and his body language works well. You have to go to the tablet settings and mute the volume, or else Craven wakes up and it's a game over scene. A fair number of the employees on the tablet are references to TV shows and comic books. That's funny. Nancy has to check both the employees and lockers tabs to discover the recently fired employee had locker 13. You open his locker with the combination to get a yellow suit for the greenhouse. I kind of like the yellow suits. They are weird looking, but they're also kind of stylish. I could totally picture a yellow suit army like that in a Star Wars movie. As Nancy notes, there's about a jillion plants in the greenhouse. How is she supposed to know which one to sample? She doesn't. Quigley didn't bother to tell her. Nancy should just grab a plant at random and call it a success. But no, she goes to the back of the greenhouse where there's a computer room. She uses the employee's ID number to log on to the computer. She learns Craven mailed a sample of the plants in bed 3333 to Richard Akins. Nancy decides that's the plant she needs. There's no reason to assume that particular plant has been eaten by the moths, but who cares? It's right by the door, so it's easy to get. Imagine how much harder it would be if you had to search the entire greenhouse in order to find the right plant. Actually, now that I think about it, that could have been an interesting challenge. The computer flashes with a red alert, warning everyone that Nancy just hacked their computers. It's not a very good security system if it tells the hacker when they've been caught. Nancy has to navigate the greenhouse maze without being seen by one of the guards. I like this puzzle. It is cleverly set up. Nancy has to visit 3 corners to get through the maze, and she has to wait for Waverly to walk out of the way before she can sneak past him. Nancy tests the stolen plant by putting it in a test tube and adding formula. She does the same thing with the frass to discover they're not a match. And then we get a second segment where you go back and forth between the camp and Quigley. When Quigley hears it's not a match, she says to test the canopy samples in her backpack. Quigley refuses to come down for this conversation. She also refuses to come down when saying the webs at Kapu Cave were made by moths. So there are multiple conversations with her stuck in a tree. That feels like an excuse to save money on animation. Quigley ends both of these conversations automatically. It's not apparent that you can click on her another time to have a more normal conversation where you pick dialogue options. Nancy tests the samples and discovers fritillated flag beetle larva is the match. Quigley can't believe the moths are eating beetles because that means the beetle population has exploded too. At this point, Quigley gives up. She gives up. She barely even started trying. She leaves and says, "I've carried you long enough, Nancy. You're on your own." It is frustrating to hear that because Quigley was no help whatsoever. Nancy did all of the work, and hearing Quigley pretend otherwise makes me mad. Quigley lets you have the metal ring in her backpack, which is the only useful thing she does in the entire game. Use the ring at Kapu Cave for a teeth puzzle. Back with the Hardy Boys, Frank investigates the attack on Joe. Mike says he talked to the police, but they couldn't have looked around because the evidence is lying on the ground, plain for anyone to see. It's a receipt from a pawn shop. Frank calls Davy's pawn shop to learn the culprit is Johnny Kudo, a freelance thief. Sadly, Frank is not smart enough to draw the obvious connection between Johnny Kudo and Big Island Mike's note about JK. That note is still on Mike's calendar, by the way. Frank should be able to point it out when Mike denies knowing Johnny Kudo. Frank can call Johnny Kudo and leave a message. Sometimes he calls back, sometimes he doesn't. I know some players were disappointed because they never got the phone call with Johnny Kudo. I seem to remember it's not a very impressive phone call. Johnny quickly figures out that Frank is bluffing, and he hangs up. The Richard Akins phone call is similar. Frank asks about his connection to the Healy Healy. If you pick the wrong option, he gets mad and hangs up. Alternately, he will admit he hired the Hardys to find dirt on the Mapus for blackmail purposes. Frank is mad, and Akins is smug about the fact that the Hardys can't quit the case. That just makes me want to quit the case out of spite. Davy thinks someone at the Immersion Excursion Center is storing stolen goods for Johnny. Frank tells this to Pua, who immediately confesses her dad is hiding stuff in underground lava tubes. Wow, it did not take much to get her to rat out her own father. I know she's using Frank to get inside the chamber, but you'd think she'd come up with a better cover story. Not, my dad's breaking the law, here's where he hides the evidence, please don't tell the police, okay? When you walk away, you hear Mike and Pua yell at each other over their illegal plans. When you ask her what's going on, she says her dad is a loser, end of story. Pua needs Frank's help because she's never been able to decipher the easy-to-understand chart for the tunnel maze. Seriously, the chart has pictures which show the tunnels you have to take. How is she so confused by it? The chart is in the locked trunk. The password is Big Island Mike's favorite flavor of shave ice. Mike turns this into a puzzle, which is annoying because you have to pay him for shave ices. He's forcing you to give him free food and money. Mike is the worst. Pick 3 flavors. He tells you which, if any, are correct. The solution is lime, coconut, and mango. He calls it Honi Awa. Use that to open the trunk to get the chart. The animal pictures on the chart double as the solution to Nancy's teeth puzzle. It's simple enough. You click on a tooth to change the picture on it. You want the 8 animals to appear in order. This is the start of a series of puzzles in Kapu Cave, which is pretty neat. The graphics are neat, and the puzzles are decent enough. It's a good way to finish the game, even if we never find out who created the puzzles or why. The next puzzle is jumping across lava rocks to the tiki statues. In order to reach the 3rd tiki statue, you have to pull the 2nd tiki's tongue. Then there's a listening challenge. You go down the cave and keep track of the 4 things you hear. Don't be fooled by the area with light, because light is not a sound. You reach a turtle shell with pictures. You press the 4 correct pictures in order. Finally, there's a series of 6 pictures. You have to number them from what happened first to what happened last. This can be tricky. The volcano makes an island with a tree, while the turtle leaves eggs that hatch. If you get it correct, Nancy dodges right before a giant stone rushes through and destroys a bridge. Kind of weird that a destructive stone ball is the reward for getting the puzzle right. The game switches to Frank. He says, if the chart helped Nancy, maybe it'll help me. Like he doesn't already know what the chart is for. Frank needs 30 Big Island bucks for snorkeling gear, which forces him to go fishing twice more. Ugh. The snorkeling gear comes with a dry bag, so Frank can change back into his normal clothes for the ending scenes. In the snorkeling area, you can collect new shells for new necklaces. That doesn't make sense, because you don't need to make necklaces for money anymore. You already bought the last item you need to beat the game. Frank can't get to the snorkeling maze until Nancy is in Kapu Cave. An aggressive eel is there to make sure he doesn't beat the game too early. The maze is pretty easy, just follow the animal pictures in the order they appear. This is a time challenge, which makes it more difficult. The fact that Frank is zooming through jet streams with so little time makes me really skeptical of the claim that Pua was able to follow him without being noticed. Frank ends up in Kapu Cave. He reaches the chamber where it's revealed the culprit's big secret is 2 crates covered with beetles. Well, that's a letdown. Big Island Mike and Pua show up. They rush through an explanation of what's going on. The characters do not look good when you see them from the side. Their heads are clearly meant to be seen from the front only. There's an earthquake, and we get the final puzzle of the game. Nancy tells Frank he has to jump from rock to rock, but a rock that's there 1 minute may not be there the next. I don't know why she talks oddly like that. It's a terrible explanation for a terrible puzzle. Many players get stuck on it. It feels like the rocks appear and disappear randomly. All you can do is guess and hope to get it right. As it turns out, it's not random. The puzzle follows a distinct pattern. If you jump up or down a column, all the rocks in the column are shifted in that direction by 1. Same with diagonals. You're supposed to figure out that pattern without being told, and then use it to build a pathway to the exit on the right. This is the only puzzle that's different on Senior Mode and Junior Mode. Why this one? I don't know. The puzzle definitely needs a better explanation. It's not the best puzzle, even if you know what you're doing. But as bad as the last puzzle is, the ending is worse. The ending explains what the story is, and that's bad. The story should be in the actual game, not in an exposition dump in the last 2 minutes. I know the previous game also had a big exposition dump at the end. Hey, you can watch my review for that. I complained about it too. It's far worse here, partly because the culprit scheme is so stupid. You can't drop a brief summary on players and expect them to accept it without questions. We're told Big Island Mike is in debt to loan sharks. That's information which should have been in the game. Say Joe found a bill when he was snooping through Mike's stuff. That would have been a good idea. That way the information doesn't come out of nowhere at the end. Mike's aunt, who has never been mentioned before, owned the Healy Healy property. If the Healy Healy goes out of business, Mike gets the property and can sell it for big money. On a side note, how does Richard Akins not know this information already? He should have figured out the scheme the instant the Mapus were mentioned, and then he wouldn't have had to bother with the Hardys. Mike used to work as a pineapple grower, again, something that should have been mentioned in the game. He knows fritillated flag beetles destroy pineapples. He got his partner in crime, Johnny Kudo, to steal beetle pheromones in order to get beetles to start mating. That was the crux of the crime in this game, beetle mating. That doesn't sound like a serious crime, that sounds like a joke. Now that the plot is exposed, the fritillated flag beetle and North Beta odorata moth populations are back to normal. That's impossible. There are over 119,000 of these creatures. They won't magically disappear just because some cans of beetle pheromones were removed. Nancy spends the rest of her vacation cleaning trash jars because the game couldn't resist ending on a poop joke. Like I said, it's a bad ending. Not only is it rushed and stupid, but it relies on a bunch of information which wasn't in the game. It's cheating when the mystery solution depends on things the player didn't know. A good ending is like Treasure in the Royal Tower. It resolves the plot and explains what happened next to all the characters. This ending doesn't explain what happened next. It tries to tell us what the heck just happened, because the story doesn't make sense. It almost feels like they didn't figure out what the story was until the game was already halfway done, at which point it was too late to change things, so they threw together whatever explanation they could. I think if the ending of the game had been better, people wouldn't hate the game so much. The game would still get a lot of hate for the character designs, the frass puzzle, and the shorter than normal length, but going out on such a sour note really spoils things and leaves players with a bad impression. For all its flaws, this definitely feels like a Nancy Drew game. You can tell it was made by the same people who did Secret of the Old Clock. It's not like Midnight in Salem or Ransom of the Seven Ships, which tried things that are so different they don't feel like normal Nancy Drew games. This does feel like Nancy Drew, albeit with a bad plot and character design. If they had an extra 6 months to work on the game and smooth out the problems, they could probably save it without changing too much. The other bad games would require a really heavy overhaul in order to save them. I give Nancy Drew Creature of Kapu Cave a 3 out of 10.